Ever since the man, the myth, the legend, Lance Stroll bought Force India a good few years ago, it's always been apparent that something in that big brain of his was working. Now, for a little while, it wasn't really apparent what exactly that was, since of course Force India wasn't necessarily a super speedy team at the time. But now, after 5 years, a couple of rebrandings, and a cycle of new drivers, Aston Martin looks like it's on track to possibly win a championship one day. But I forgot to mention one little thing. In fact, it's actually about Lawrence's brain and the fact that it seems like it may not actually be working right now, since this guy, his son, Lance Stroll, which is their real family name by the way, is still at the wheel of one of those Aston Martins. Back in 2017, at the ripe age of 18, Lance made his debut in Formula 1 with a Williams team that is far different from the way we know it as now. And by that I mean it wasn't complete and utter garbage. You might be thinking, 18, that's quite young for an F1 driver, and you'd be right in thinking that. I mean, I'm 18 right now and just look at what I'm doing. Well, Lance didn't compete in F2. He skipped straight by and ran into F1 headfirst, much like Max Verstappen. So if he made it into F1 at such a young age, then that must mean he had a stellar junior career, right? That is correct, you absolute genius. Now, I'm gonna skip past his karting career, that's always just been a bit boring to me, but all you really need to know is that he made it past that stage, so he was good enough. He then joined Italian F4 with Prema, where he won the entire championship by 100 points, even though he missed out on the last 3 races. There is nothing to criticize here, this guy was just plain and simply fast at this point in time. The very next season, he found himself in the big leagues. Formula 3. Something every single driver goes through, I know, but hey, come on, it's Lance Stroll, you probably didn't think he'd get this far on his own. In his first year with a grid that was as far from weak as it could get, I'm talking Charles Leclerc, Antonio Giovinazzi, George Russell, Jake Dennis, Felix Rosenqvist, and Alex Albon, Lance managed to finish in 5th place in the championship that year. And in his second F3 season with a fairly stacked grid, not 2015 stacked, but still pretty good, and by that I mean George Russell, Zhou Guanyu, Callum Ilott, Antoine Hubert, Lance won the championship like it was a walk in the park. He finished that season with a whopping 507 points to his name, a whole 233 points ahead of George Russell in 3rd place. And just in case you somehow forgot, when he's not crying about something, Russell can be found consistently taking the fight to his teammate Lewis Hamilton. And Lance beat his cheeks so hard that season that I'm pretty sure it caused earthquakes around the world. But don't quote me on that. Anyway, even with all that behind him, it would still have been a great idea to move on to F2 and further develop his driving skills over there without the added pressure of F1. But no, this is where Father Strolovic came in. Lance had a Williams seat prepped and ready to go by the start of the 2017 season. And again, while he did have a banging junior career, you wouldn't think hopping into Formula 1 so prematurely could be a good idea. But really, in his first year, Lance kind of proved a lot of people wrong, finishing the season only 3 points behind Felipe Massa, who just so you know was a world champion for a few seconds back in 08. And in terms of podiums, he managed one in his very first season, so as far as rookie seasons, that's a win in my books. But in the coming years, he moved on to Father Stroll's newly bought team, and the rest is history, I guess. Over the years, he managed another few podiums, and in 2020 at the Turkish Grand Prix, he clutched his very first pole position in wet conditions, which was undoubtedly impressive. But to say that these types of performances were common at all would be like saying Nikita Mazepin had a Lewis Hamilton-esque rookie season. So, in short, no, not many impressive outings for Stroll since then. In fact, Lance has over the years become known more for being insanely inconsistent. And when he is driving consistently, it's at the back of the grid. And I'd go as far as saying that this year, 2023 has been one of his worst starts to a season ever. Aston have of course managed to produce a really fast car, like Lawrence said they would. And also they have Fernando Alonso on their team now, who as of today has scored 5 podiums in 8 races so far this year, with 2 of them being P2s. And Lance? He's fighting to stay in the top 10. Now, yeah, I know it's a bit of an unfair comparison. Alonso and Stroll, anyone with half a brain, you know what, even less than that, the brain of an ostrich could tell you that Fernando would whoop Lance in the standings. But Aston aren't planning on being like this forever. They want to win championships. Championships require consistent pace, and that's not something Lance has shown much of, has he? Now, let's say hypothetically in 2024, Aston made the best car. Faster than the Red Bull, but not by a mile. Just reasonably faster. Let's be realistically unrealistic here. We know that even pretty mid drivers can get a podium or not win here and there if they're gifted the fastest car on the grid. But something they can't do is make up for their lack of pace entirely just because they have the fastest car. Lance, for example, in this hypothetical situation would be under constant pressure from someone like Max Verstappen, who I can almost guarantee would finish higher in the championship. This is exactly the kind of thing that could put a Constructors' Championship in jeopardy. And in the long term, I really think that Lance may end up being a bottleneck for a team with Aston Martin's ambitions. But this always gets me thinking back to Lance's junior career. Where on earth did this dude's pace go? This guy without any doubts has talent, he's shown us that before. So what happened? One theory, which honestly I believe, is that he's simply not trying hard enough. Now hear me out on this one. It's weird with someone like Lance since he doesn't really have to perform for his seat in the sport. Now, could that lack of a push, that lack of risk be putting Lance in a comfort zone where he's just content where he's at? Of course it is. Come on, don't for one moment try and say that if suddenly Lance had the risk of being cast aside for someone like Felipe Drugovich, for example, you think he wouldn't try harder and perform better. But at the end of the day, Formula 1 is a business. So even if Daddy Stroll is the ruler of the Aston Martin kingdom, he's not the sole person making the decisions. That's just not how a business works. Soon enough, if Aston actually lose out big time because of Lance, there's going to be a lot of explaining to do to the stakeholders of the team. So really, the way I see it, one of these two things has to happen in order for Aston Martin to be able to win a championship. Alonso isn't the problem, we know that. He's pretty much created a phase 2 of his prime and is driving like his life depends on it. Lance, on the other hand, needs a push. He needs the pressure that all other drivers on the grid have in order to see what really is going on in that brain of his. If he cracks, sadly that would mean he's just not cut out for a team like Aston Martin. And from there, if any higher up in the team is smarter than a literal rock, they'll get rid of him and bring in someone new. On the other hand, I think there's a possibility that Lance could improve under this pressure, and from there we may even see a whole new side to Lance in Formula 1. Is this wishful thinking? Is that a ridiculous thought? I don't know, you tell me in the comments below. But that's where I'll end this video. If you did like this video and you want to see more of this kind of content, do me a favor and like the video and subscribe in order to help with the growth of this channel. But really, thank you so much for watching, have a blessed one, and hopefully I'll catch you in the next video. Bye bye.